Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Compod.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here with us.
We're still doing it. Yeah, we're having a good time, right?
You know what? We're few and far between, but
Yeah.
we're still here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're still kicking. And that's all that matters.
Yeah,
Had a
of
few
course.
things going on.
Yeah, we're a little busy, you guys.
Yeah.
We have
Always.
full-time jobs outside of this.
Always. Outside of this podcasting
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
you guys
Yeah.
do, but yeah.
This is just what makes us famous. This isn't what we do.
This is
just
purely vain. Yeah, purely for vanity purposes.
Sure.
Purely
Sure.
just to get influencer brand deals.
But just kidding. I mean, the reality is we're having a good time, but we're excited to talk about
Stuff.
Federal
all of the
finance
things. I know. I was about to say it, and then I thought maybe that sounds a bit dry.
Yeah,
It
just a
sounds
little bit.
dry,
It
but
sounds dry,
hopefully-
but you know
yeah.
what? We pop up on your Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We pop up when we have something to say.
Yeah,
Okay, and
yeah.
so today,
We got
what
it.
we're saying is
Very important.
we have federal financial aid.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yay!
Go, Nicole. We have Nicole McMillin. She's our director of financial aid here at
Hello,
ICOM.
everyone.
Thanks for joining us, Nicole.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. So we told everyone May 2022, hey, once we graduate our class, we're going to apply for federal financial aid.
Yeah,
And so for those mathematicians out there, it's now September 2024.
sure.
So it's been a minute. Nicole.
You know,
why-
wait.
why?
I want to hold on. So I want to back up maybe a little bit further because I think I'm not sure everyone understands that because I think you think of going to school and you can go to that school and you apply for federal financial aid.
Right.
They may not understand that a new school, it doesn't just happen automatically.
That's such a good
and
point.
that there is a process. So maybe we can find out a little bit about what that
is.
kind
yes.
of is, right? And
feels
what
like
the
you kinda-
requirements are to even apply.
Yeah, it feels like you kind of have to prove yourself before you can have
Sure.
Title IV funding.
Yes, definitely. And in a couple of different ways. So you can apply once you have full accreditation as a school, which under our accrediting body did require that we graduate the first class. So that put us 4 years into having students at ICOM already. Being a standalone school and a for-profit school, there's different rules under the application process. So there were a lot of things that when we submitted our application, then we also had to submit financial information. We had to submit policies, procedures. We had to basically show that we are what they would consider administratively capable. And that happens through a number of different ways. So just that we know what we're doing, we know how to track, we're financially responsible. There's a lot of things that do happen, and it is a long application process. Obviously, some things on either side of that with the pandemic happening in the midst of the pandemic, and there was a lot happening there with U.S. Department of Education. They lost about a third of their workforce, I believe, during that time, if not more. And so there were a lot of things happening that I feel like made it an even longer process. Being on this side of it is great. It did take a really long time. This is something I started working on when I started at ICOM in 2017.
Yeah.
So this is a 7-year project that's finally come to fruition, and now we're just in the midst of implementation. But yeah, it's been a long time coming. We have been able to meet with some federal aid trainers, and we're not alone. In speaking with this individual, he said there were over 30 schools that are at an 18-month plus
Oh, wow.
into the process.
Oh,
So
my gosh.
it's not an unusual thing, even though it seems like it took forever. It tracks pretty normal for what that application process
Oh,
looks
that's
like.
incredible. I didn't
Yeah.
even
Yes.
realize. Wow. Okay, so now where are we at in the process as we sit here, September 2024? What can prospective students or students who will be joining us in fall of 2025 come to expect?
Yeah, so all of this is new, so we're getting into federal systems and starting to figure out what that looks like and transmitting data with those systems. That's kind of where we're currently at on an administrative side of it. On a student side, the students can complete a FAFSA form. Just the 2024-25 is the one that's open right now, so that's for this current year. And typically that FAFSA application opens the October before you'd be coming in to a fall start date. It is for the second year in a row, we know it's going to be delayed. Department of Education has said they cannot get the 25-26 FAFSA out sooner than December.
Oh, wow.
That happened last year as well, and it really went all the way almost until March, to where almost everybody had access to it. There were certain populations that weren't able to get into it until well into spring. So hopeful that won't happen in 25-26. But in the December timeframe, students could look for that FAFSA application and complete it with our federal school code. And then it gets sent to us, and then we'll be contacting students with additional steps. And really what that looks like is probably they can complete it in December, but in springtime is really when we'll be walking them through all of the remaining steps of the process.
Awesome. So current students could get aid for next semester.
So current students can get it for this entire year, actually.
Oh, how does that work?
So they just have to complete the FAFSA, and we are required to review all of that data that comes to us, and required to make sure there's no conflicting information. We may need clarification or documentation to clear up anything before we can determine eligibility for aid. But students, this year they can get access to those federal loan funds for the entire year. Something probably listeners may also not know is at a graduate level, the types of loans a student is eligible for are different than an undergrad, and they carry higher interest rates at a graduate level.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, different.
So students are at a graduate level, they're only eligible for what's called a direct unsubsidized loan, and that is what you complete your FAFSA to determine. We determine your eligibility for, and then a graduate plus loan. So those two loans are at a little over an 8% and a 9% interest rate, respectively. So they're pretty high interest rates as well.
Yeah. When we talk about pursuing medical school, it's often referred to as like the biggest debt you'll ever come into, perhaps in your life, aside from, buying a house or a car, those things like that, educational debt. Can we talk about, from your perspective, what you would recommend or how you would recommend prospective medical students pay for medical school? Because it is such a big investment.
It is a very large investment. We encourage students to look for sources of funding other than the loan. So there are a lot of scholarships out there and scholarship opportunities, like the Health Professions Scholarship Program through one of the branches of the military or the VA or the National Health Service Corps scholarship, where those scholarships are covering full tuition and fees, providing monthly stipends. Those are considered a scholarship to service program, so you do owe service back for that funding that you're getting. But in relation to it, most of those are a 1-to-1, so 4 years of scholarship, 4 years of service. I think 4 years of service is well worth getting a medical education paid for, definitely. And they do have different eligibility and selection requirements that students would have to meet. But we do have a lot of students that have been using both of those, have been selected for those different scholarship programs. And then when it comes to loans, just being smart about borrowing and really assessing, need. And if you need the full cost of attendance, we do estimate out beyond tuition and fees what living expenses are going to be each year. And we are pretty generous in the way that we get to those figures in understanding particularly the current economic environment and in our area where we live, the cost of living. So we do evaluate it annually to make sure we're keeping up with the cost students are really incurring.
Perfect. And then once students, I'm like moving ahead a little bit, but once students get set to graduate, you do like counseling with them, right?
Yes.
What kind of tips do you share?
So we talk about, it's called exit counseling. We do go over really, things to consider in repayment and things to consider if you're going to refinance. That has looked a little differently because we only have had the private loans. And the options under private loans are much more limited when it comes to repayment and the options available there. So it'll be morphing as we move through getting federal aid and including a lot more information about federal repayment programs and some forgiveness programs.
Perfect. Do you guys have any questions about financial aid?
Well, I just want to go back. So you said our current students that are enrolled can get aid for the entire year. So what does that process look like since we've already started the fall semester?
Yeah, so it's going to be a little messy, quite honestly, because some students proceeded with just paying and then will get the federal loans and in effect kind of reimburse themselves. Some students had put private student loans in place. They do have the option to return money to those private student loans and bring in federal loans instead, apply for the federal loans and have that funding come in. Some students have better interest rates under the private loans.
Ask about
Yeah, I
that
was gonna ask about that too,
comparatively.
yeah.
Comparatively, how do they
stack
fare?
up? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and we don't see our part of the process, we don't see the student's interest rate because that is a credit decision under their application with the lender that they borrow through. So we don't see those. Most of what we hear is word of mouth. So that tends to be the really high interest rates is mostly what we hear from students about if, they're in double digits. But we do know we have some students that have loans at rates below where the federal loans are.
Yep.
So that then just becomes an individual consideration of the overall cost of that loan to the individual. So where that interest rate's at and looking at that over kind of a standard repayment time, but also origination fees because some of the private loans don't have origination fees and the federal loans do have origination fees. And in the federal loan program, those are basically an amount of money that's scooped off the top of the loan before funding's sent to the school. So it does reduce, but they still are accruing interest on the total amount and owe the total amount back. So it'll be different. It'll really be different per individual, what their decision is and how to move forward. But we do have options. We actually just held an information session on Friday with the students so that they could understand these nuances and the different options and things that are available because it's not everybody's day-to-day thing that you would know or think about or like know the intricacies of.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for years. Like you're the professional.
I have, 20 plus years in financial aid. It's been my adult career for sure.
What was the most common question that you've received about federal financial aid?
I think, so there's some misconceptions around it. I think there was I don't know if you want to call it a rumor, there was some misinformation out there that the private loans that the students have could become federal loans.
I had heard that, yes.
But that is not true. So you can never make a private loan a federal loan. And I think also just understanding that it's a year-by-year application and a loan amount process. So you have to apply every year and get loans. And there's a lot of similarities, honestly, between the private loans and the federal loans in the way that they are administered.
Gotcha.
What is the benefit for our students with us having federal financial aid? Like where do they benefit?
So I think the biggest benefit is probably in the number of repayment plans that are available under the federal loan program. So typically with the private student loan, it's just standard repayment. So you take the amount and you chunk it out over the repayment period.
Is there a deferment? Are they able to defer those private loans during residency?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So both private and federal, they can defer during residency. But I think the biggest probe behind the federal loan programs and maybe what people think is that there are a lot of repayment options. So starting with just interest or having income contingent or just different options there. And then right now there's also public service loan forgiveness program out there. And it's been a very small percentage of people that have even qualified for it. You do have to make 10 years of payments.
And work for a nonprofit.
And work for a nonprofit.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So it's very, that's not going to be a lot of students coming out of medical school more often than I would think. But those are the options that I think set the federal loans apart just because there are more options. And I think there's an assumption that the federal loan rates or the federal loan overall is better, and that would include rates and things like origination fees. And so I think there's some surprise there when you say, okay, well, here's where those interest rates are and where those origination fees are. The students are just, there's an assumption that federal is better or more secure.
Right, right.
I've heard an assumption, and I'm so glad you're here to maybe answer this for me, that oftentimes it's harder for like a first generation college student to be able to qualify for private student loans. Is that true, or is that a myth, or is that where the federal financial aid comes in that can really come and save the day for some of these students?
It definitely can be true. That is unique to each individual and their credit history and information. On the private student loans, it is very credit heavy in the decision making between the lenders. We've been able to tell there's some difference between the two lenders that we have and how they're looking, like where they're placing weight on what parts of a credit review. But yeah, if you don't have a lot of credit history or you don't have a stellar credit history, it can be a little bit more, or you don't have somebody to co-sign. If one of those two things also applies, then it can be much more difficult. I do think that only having the private student loans has definitely skewed our classes more affluent. So I think we'll see some difference with the federal aid, and because students really, it's completing the FAFSA, and as long as they haven't reached limits of annual limits or lifetime limits and haven't defaulted, then they will be eligible for the unsub. The other loan does have a credit review component to it, but it's very different. It's just looking for the absence of adverse credit history. So it's not a full deep dive into the credit like the private student loans are.
Gotcha.
So I have a question. So many of our students obviously come in with debt already, having paid for their undergraduate education. It's not uncommon that we have a lot of students who have master's degrees, some other professional degrees. How does having federal financial aid maybe impact some of that? Was there previously the inability to defer some of those, because they may be under loan repayment and then they're coming back to school, or how does that maybe influence that?
Yeah, so having an in-school deferment does require that the school have federal aid.
Okay.
So there's a couple benefits that
big.
haven't been available because we haven't had federal aid. So in-school deferment being one of those for both prior federal and prior private loans. And then the tax benefits that are available for education credits are all tied to federal aid. They do not.
I didn't even think of tax benefits.
Yeah. They don't extend to the private loans. So those have been some things that students haven't been able to take advantage of that they will be able to take advantage of now.
This is such a layered process, and I'm
sure
learning
is.
so many
Yes.
like little nuggets as you sit here and share your knowledge with us. This is crazy.
Yep. I'm so grateful that our students have you. And,
thank you.
I tell people about my journey. I'm like, I did not know what was going on in med school. I completely relied on the knowledge of our financial aid office and just really trusted everything that they told us to do and the information that they gave us. So we're really fortunate that we have like such a seasoned and invested team here.
Yeah. You and Carlene are holding down the fort
Yeah,
for all
right.
the students.
I think, and that's important. I mean, especially in the area of money, it's such a sensitive and, can be a volatile topic. It's, something that people don't really necessarily want to open up about or share.
Sure.
So we try to do our best to provide information and resources for students to use without them having to give us information that maybe they don't want to share.
Absolutely. Right.
But yeah, I think it is important to have a financial aid team that is student focused and really wanting to help the students make the best decisions they can for themselves. We like to tell the students, just come to us and ask us questions because we're the people in this day to day.
Absolutely.
You don't need to know all this detail. That's why you can come to us and talk to us, and we can give you the information and the resources you need.
That's perfect. You can help them financially plan.
Yep.
Is there anything about Title IV federal financial aid that we didn't cover that you'd want people to know about?
I think we've covered a lot of it actually. Nothing's coming to mind. Hopeful that Department of Ed gets some things ironed out with the timelines and the difficulties that they've been having over the last couple of years. That just creates more. I think it creates more hurdles for students, and it's difficult to understand that it maybe isn't some of these things aren't at a school level or the school's decision. Like, we are reliant in a lot of ways on Department of Ed for this process. It is the application and the aid is their process. And, we try to make it as smooth as possible at a school level. The things that have happened this past year, I would consider people in financial aid offices across the U.S. as saints.
Yes.
And just major advocates for their students. They've had to deal with a lot, and they keep pushing forward and helping students.
That's so great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like we just barely scratched the surface.
Oh,
but
sure. Yes.
for any
definitely just scratched the surface, I would imagine.
Oh my gosh. Well, for any current students, know that you can talk to Nicole and Carlene for all of your financial aid questions. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.
Congratulations on your 7-year project.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.